Well, hey, welcome to Crosspoint. My name is Abby, and we are so excited that you're joining us today. Whether you're sitting in front of a device, in a living room, maybe in bed, perhaps a coffee shop or a bar, wherever you are, we just want to say thank you for tuning in with us today. And also, we want to make sure to wish a very happy Father's Day to all of the dads out there. We are so grateful for you, for all of the father figures in our lives, the roles that you have played building, shaping, coaching us into the people that we are today. Now, whoever you are, dad or not, we'd love to hear from you today. And the best way to do that is to scan the QR code or fill out the form next to the stream. Take a minute to tell us about yourself. If there's anything that we can pray for, we'd love to hear that. If it's your first time with us, huge welcome. We hope it's the first of many. We'll be sending a gift in the mail this week just for joining us today. As you're doing that, we've got some exciting ways that you can connect around this place that you might just want to take advantage of. First is Carpool Cinema is back right here at the Crosspoint campus this coming Friday, June 23rd for the drive-in movie Spider-Man No Way Home. The cool thing, this is a free and great opportunity for you to invite someone to join you. So pack up the crew and come join us in the Crosspoint parking lot this Friday night. You can bring your family, your neighbors, your dog, even the mailman. Okay, maybe not the mailman, but you get the idea. Anyone you want. Come early, tailgate your heart out, bike, skate, drive, even walk over, and let's make a night of it. The lot opens at 8 p.m. and the movie starts at dusk. We can't wait to see you there. Next, we've got another round of the Clifton Strengths Workshop beginning this Tuesday. This 2-week workshop is a fantastic opportunity to discover and leverage the unique strengths that God has wired into you. I'm telling you, it's pretty amazing to hear about and to discover how God has wired talents, strengths into you, things that you uniquely bring into the world, and to learn how you can get the most out of them. You can register by scanning this QR code to find out more. And as a part of the workshop, you'll have the opportunity to complete the Clifton Strengths Assessment and be trained by a Gallup certified strengths coach. We'd love to see you there. Next weekend, we're excited to begin one of our favorite teaching series of the year called Spark, Ideas That Ignite. Now, you probably know this, but new ideas have a way of creating powerful change in our lives. And this summer, we're going to be exploring 6 new powerful ideas that we believe will move the needle on things that matter in our lives and matter in the world. Looking to ignite your life? Join us beginning next week. You'll get encouragement, practical guidance, and some new ideas to help you live your best life. Sometimes all it takes is a spark. All right, we've got a great service today. Today we're going to be looking at the question, is it okay to have doubts when it comes to faith? If you've ever wondered this, or perhaps you've wondered if your doubt actually excludes you from being able to consider yourself a person of faith, you are in the right place. So to get us headed in that direction, let's head to the venue for a great Mumford & Sons song by Mark and the Crosspoint Band. Here's Believe.
You may call it in the ceiling, but you've only lost the night. Present all your pretty feelings, may they comfort you tonight. And I'm climbing over something, and I'm running through these walls. I don't even know if I believe. I don't even know if I believe. I don't even know if I believe everything you're trying to say to me. Everything you're trying to say to me, so open up my eyes, tell me I'm alive. This is never gonna go our way. Gonna have to guess what's on your mind. Something like you love me, like you wanna move away from the noise of this place. I don't even know if I believe. I don't even know if I believe. I don't even know if I wanna believe everything you're trying to say to me. So open up my eyes, tell me I'm alive. This is never gonna go our way. I'm gonna have to guess what's on your mind. So open up my eyes, tell me I'm alive. This is never gonna go our way. I'm gonna have to guess what's on your mind.
Yeah, come on, let's make some noise for this band this weekend. Man, great music. You know that line right there, I don't even know what I believe. I don't know if I want to believe. You know, we're going to dive into that this weekend, and we're going to talk a bit about doubts and the doubts that perhaps we have at times when it comes to faith, and we're going to be wrapping up this series, Is This Allowed? So, man, welcome to Crosspoint. So excited to have you with us this weekend. My name's Curt, if we haven't had a chance to meet, and happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. So excited to have you join us, and let's make some noise for those joining us online this weekend. So good to have you join us across our city, our state, our nation. And if it's your first time with us, we hope it's the first of many times. You've caught us in the fourth week of this series, Is This Allowed? And we've really been kind of answering some questions about Jesus, the real Jesus, some real questions that we have. And one of our hopes in this series is that we just see that, man, he was a real guy. Even though he's fully God, he was a real guy. He experienced things that you and I experienced. He's not so disconnected from what it means to be human that he couldn't understand the things that we go through. And yet, I don't know if you're this way, but sometimes you read stories about Jesus, or you read, see things with famous people, and you're like, I don't even know if that's real. Are they just making that up? I want to kind of illustrate this for you for a moment. If you've been around Crosspoint for any time at all, I love comedians. I love comedy. I love people like, Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, Nate Bargatze's one of my favorites. And, every now and then you hear them, and I think one of the reasons we gravitate to people like this is because they're relatable. And one of the moments that I recently heard from Nate Bargatze, I actually experienced, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment, but first I want you to see this right here.
I thought I was going to breeze through security, but I got held up just because the guy in front of me. And he goes through the metal detector, and it goes off. And so they asked him, they're like, do you have anything metal on you? And he goes, I have keys on me, my keys. And we thought he was going to say like his knee or hip, just old people have metal in them a lot. And he goes, keys? Do you think that would do it? You're like, I think that would be the #1 answer on Family Feud of what would set a metal detector off. Keys. I told him, I was like, look, let's try it with and without it. I'd love to know. Maybe they've been lying to us about this key thing.
So my wife and I were traveling last week to the East Coast for a little getaway, and we were going through the Indianapolis airport, and we get up to TSA, and we're getting ready to go through security, and we put our bags through, and there's a guy in front of us, and he seems a bit, anxious as he's going through, and maybe he hasn't traveled much, I don't know, and it looked like he'd been in a conference. He had a lanyard on, and he puts his bag through, like, the x-ray machine, and, something goes off, and they pull it aside, and, put it in the, everything's got to be searched line. And so you see him get a little more, anxious as he goes through, and he's like, hey, is there anything wrong with my bag? And we're just kind of following him because our stuff's behind his, and they say, well, sir, we're going to have to search your bag. And they said, is there anything in here that, shouldn't be in here? And he's like, well, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, I bought like a 20-ounce Dr. Pepper before I came and put it in there. Do you think that'd do it? And they're like, well, sir, we think that's like the number one thing that would send this off. And I look at my wife, and I'm like, it's like right from Nate Bargatze right there. And I think what it did for me is it showed me like that's just real life. I mean, I think the reason we connect with it is because we get it. We have those experiences. Those guys see life a little different. But I think this is really my hope of what we've been seeing about the person of Jesus, that he gets us. He gets what it's like. And, the crazy thing we've been discovering about Jesus is that people who were nothing like him liked him. And he liked them back. And so there's something about that helps us understand that, man, he was a relatable guy and he knows what it's like to live in this earth. And so we're going to answer our fourth question in the series tonight. And this is a big one. We're going to answer this question right here. Is it okay to have doubts? And my goal really is to help us and really give us some tools, because I think we can probably all relate to this wherever we are in the spiritual spectrum, wherever we are in our faith journey. We all at some point have wrestled or are wrestling and will continue to wrestle with doubts. So let me pray for us as we dive into this. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We come into a place like this and we can ask this question. We can wrestle with things that we just aren't sure about, things that we are wanting to know about, but we just don't have a confidence in yet. And so, God, I just pray that right now, the fact that we're here, the fact that we're tuning in online is even an indicator, I think, to you that we want to learn more about you. We want to see you, experience you more. So I just pray, God, that you would allow us to do that. As we seek you, God, that we would find you, we'd see you in new ways. And I pray these things according to your reputation, Jesus. Amen. Amen. All right, so today I want us to look at the place of doubt in the faith journey. And meaning, is it possible? I mean, is it really possible to get to the place where you believe 100% of everything? Where you just are absolutely certain and you no longer have any doubts? And I just want to answer that right off the bat for you. The answer is no. You will never fully get there. You will never get to that place where you can fully say, yes, I'm 100% certain of everything, which means there is absolutely a place for doubt in the faith journey. And as I think about people in my life throughout my years that have formed and shaped my faith, people who have been kind of mentors for me, I think about their veracity, I think about the gravity of their lives, and every single one of them wrestled with doubts on a regular basis. I mean, they'd even talk about it. That's something that formed and shaped me. Everybody has doubts. And this isn't like the dirty underbelly of Christianity or following Jesus. I mean, every faith, people in every faith and religion have doubts. I mean, atheists have doubts, Muslims have doubts, Buddhists have doubts. It doesn't matter what kind of religious person you are. I mean, faith and doubt is something we're going to have to dance with. In fact, there's a 20th century philosopher, mathematician, atheist, a guy by the name of Bertrand Russell, and he was once asked about his faith, and he was asked this question: are you willing to die for your atheist beliefs? And he answered, he said, of course not, because after all, I might be wrong. And I think he kind of said that tongue-in-cheek a bit, but I think there's something kind of cool about the intellectual honesty with him answering that way. I mean, for him to say, I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I don't know that I'm 100% certain that there is a God. I'm not 100% certain that there's not. I just think it's cool when somebody has the ability to say, hey, I'm honestly, kind of answering this question. Yeah, I have some doubts. In fact, the late Tim Keller, who just passed away this past month, a great modern-day theologian in New York City, just had this amazing church that attracted young New Yorkers to his campus for years. He talked about the role of doubt and faith and how they intertwine. He said, a faith without some doubts is like the human body without any antibodies in it. People who blithely go through life too busy or too indifferent to ask hard questions as to why they believe as they do will find themselves defenseless. And I hope that's some great encouragement to us today. I hope that, especially for those of you who maybe grew up in the church, that hey, there's room for you in your faith journey to actually wrestle with some of the things that we're just not certain of. And certainly if you haven't grown up in a circle of faith, that there is room for that. And I think the other thing that's kind of cool about this, and I've experienced it myself, is it's when we wrestle with these doubts that our faith actually gets strengthened. In fact, I think one of the worst things you could do in this series, or even as a result of what we're talking about today or over the last few weeks, is just kind of blindly believe everything we've been talking about. I mean, hopefully you've been kind of taking things and going and like checking them out for yourself. This past week in my men's group that I connect with, one of the guys at the table, we were talking about stress, and the question last week, did Jesus know stress? And it was really cool because one of the guys said, hey, there's 4 things I really took out of this weekend, and then he started listing them. I said, hey, wait a second, those were like from the weekend before on loneliness. He's like, oh, my bad. I'm like, no, I think it's really cool that like 2 weeks later, you still remember these things. And he's like, well, I've been wrestling through like some of these truths that I've got to lean into. And I think that's the point, that as we come into these opportunities and see characteristics of who Jesus is, that we wrestle through them, and when we do that, that will grow us. In fact, I would even go as far as saying the absence of doing that, puts you in a situation where all it takes is one tragedy, all it takes is one situation where perhaps God doesn't show up the way that you want, and it just shipwrecks your faith. In fact, I think that's what Tim Keller is saying right there. I think he's saying, that doubt has to be a part of the experience because the wrestling through these things actually grow us. For me, one of the doubts that's kind of been on the forefront of my mind over the last number of months is this one right here. How much of the future does God actually know? And what's crazy about this question for me is I know people personally that I greatly respect, their theology, and they have a deep faith. And I have people that I know that would say, hey, God knows everything, that God's actually planned everything, God's predestined, preordained everything in your life. And there's not an element of your life that isn't already planned out. And then I have, likewise, friends on the other side of the spectrum that would say, again, great gravity in their faith. They believe Jesus is who he says he is, but they're like, faith, God only knows the future to the extent that the future can be known. Meaning, there are certain things that as free will agents that we have the ability to decide, and those affect how things play out. And it's not like God gets caught off guard with it. It's just that as free will agents, there are certain times where we make decisions and that opens up other opportunities or perhaps closes down opportunities. And so I don't fully know where I land on this. I probably lean to this side a little more, but I'm still working on this. But see, the implications of that question have like huge, play in terms of how I see myself, how I see God, how I understand grace, the lens through which I view other people. And so I just want you to know that for me, when I wrestle with things like this, I feel, and I want you to feel like you're in good company. I mean, we see this all throughout the story of God, that there's absolutely got to be a place for us to wrestle through our doubts. Because see, here's a couple things that happen. One of the additional things we see happen is wrestling with our doubts is actually a sign of maturity. There's a lot of ways that we can grow, and one of those ways is sitting in places like this, tuning in online, where you're sitting with practical teaching and being challenged on things that maybe you otherwise wouldn't think about. Certainly when we get in community with other people and we dialogue of what it means to follow Jesus. I mean, we grow in our faith when we serve, when we allow our time to be used to volunteer on teams, when we allow our funds to be used to fund, what God's doing in the world. I mean, these are all ways we grow. When we do, personal disciplines like talking to God, spending time getting to know God, studying God, these are all ways God grows our faith. But I think in that pot also has to be this idea of engaging with our doubts. Because I think when we do that, we mature. Another interesting thing that I think we see happen is that wrestling through our doubts actually is a sign of relationship. I don't know how it is in your home, but in our home, some of the people that I argue with the most are the people in my house that I'm closest with. In fact, my wife and I, at times, will have conflict. And you know why we have conflict? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, because Curt, you're probably really hard to get along with. That's why you have conflict, which might be part of the problem. But at a different level, part of why we have conflict is because my wife, Julie, she'll make choices that cause her life to trend in a certain direction, and it affects me. And likewise, I'll make choices that cause my life to trend in a certain direction, and it affects her. And sometimes these come into conflict with each other, and when we don't see eye to eye on this, we have to wrestle through that. And in those times of conflict, though, it's actually evidence that we're invested, that it actually means something. And so as we think about faith, I mean, faith is always done in relationship, and there's got to be a place for wrestling. In fact, to kind of help us better understand how these interweave together, I want you to take a look at this right here.
Has your heart ever beat fast, wrestling with faith and doubt? Have you ever had questions, prayers that went unanswered? When it comes to the supernatural, it seems there are only two ways to approach it: with faith or with doubt. Mostly we think the two are in opposition, that they don't play nicely together. And in the face of faith or doubt, our hearts must choose. Belief or unbelief. One or the other. And yet, is it possible we're wrong? Could there be room for both? A deeper look into Scripture reveals this very thing. Peter nearly drowned in a sea of doubt that just moments before he'd been walking on. Thomas doubts the risen Christ even as his hands touch Jesus' wounds. Upon hearing the supernatural things Jesus was doing, even John the Baptist had reservations about this miracle man. And even Jesus himself held faith and doubt in tension. On the cross, he cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And so, let us steady our beating hearts, seeking to reconcile our questions. Today, whether you have faith or whether you have doubt, God leaves room for both. Like the man who cried out to Jesus to heal his son, may we echo the phrase, "Lord, I believe. Help me in my unbelief."
God, help me in my unbelief. Well, for the rest of our time, I want us to look at the difference between wrestling with your doubt and wallowing in your doubt. Because one of the things we're invited to do is to wrestle with our doubt. But when we wallow in our doubt, it's actually a pretty dangerous slope. And so how do we differentiate between wrestling and wallowing? Well, I want to give us some rules for engagement. I think when we see some of the ways that people historically have wrestled through understanding who God is, all throughout the story of God, we see these rules of engagement that are used to actually help clarify what we believe and what we understand and what we put our trust in. And one of the exchanges we're going to look at today is this exchange between Jesus and a guy by the name of Thomas. Now, if you've ever used the phrase or heard the phrase doubting Thomas, that actually comes from this story right here, because Thomas, he was a doubter. He was known for being a doubter. And so here's how John tells us this plays out. This is the Gospel of John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. He kind of gives us this picture of what took place between Jesus and Thomas. This is now Thomas, one of the 12 disciples, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So this is after Jesus died, he resurrected, he came back, and he meets with the team. He meets with his close 12, his disciples, but Thomas isn't in the circle. So it says the other disciples told him, "Hey, Thomas, we have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and I put my finger where his nails were, and put my hand into his side," look at this, he says, "I will not believe." Now, let me give us a little context on this right here. Several days before this, all right, this interaction right here, Thomas, he watches Jesus get crucified. All right, now crucifixion, everybody knew crucifixion back in the first century. It was a very, very painful form of death. It was a very common form of death, and it was a very effective means of death. And so Thomas is just kind of like, hey, you don't beat crucifixion, all right? I mean, he watched Jesus die. He's like, I watched the nails go in his hands. He's like, I watched him suffocate in the fluids as his lungs filled up with fluids hanging on the cross. That's how you actually die. You suffocate as you hang there. He's like, I saw the spear go in his side, and the fluids kind of come out separated, which is a sign that the body is passed. He said, I saw all this, all right? And so when I saw him die, I mean, I was just expecting he was going to do what every other dead person has done. He's going to stay dead. And he's like, I know Jesus talked about, hey, I'm coming back. But he's like, I don't know exactly what it was meaning. It's just that if I don't see it for myself, I'm just going to assume that there's no way he can beat death. And what's fascinating about this moment is how Jesus interacts and responds with Thomas right here. Take a look at what happens next. It says, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and he stood right there among them, and he said, peace be with you. Then he looked at Thomas. He says to Thomas, Thomas, put your fingers here. See my hands. Reach out your hands and put it in my side. He said, stop doubting and believe. And Thomas, listen to what Thomas says. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And then Jesus said to him, because you have seen me and you have believed. And then this next phrase, I don't think this next phrase was just for Thomas right here. I think this is like for everyone throughout the ages right here, including you and I right now. He said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And so that's the question right there, right? Like, how do I do that? How do I get to a place of believing something that I cannot see? Well, I think it's in these rules of engagement. I want to give you 3 of them, 3 rules for how we process through things when we have barriers and we have doubts. All right, the first rule is this: you have to respect your opponent. And in this case, it's our doubts. We have to recognize, say, hey, my doubts are legitimate. If I'm wondering something, if I'm questioning something, there is room for that, and we have to be honest about what those are. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that doubt is a sign of faith. Many of us think that doubt is a lack of faith, but I think it actually gives evidence that you have a faith. See, when you are doubting something, it's not that you don't have faith, you just have faith in an ulterior or an alternative option, right? You aren't neutral in this situation. And so, say for instance, some of us are saying, okay, when Jesus claims to be like the only way to God the Father, I mean, if you question that, you're like, I don't know if that's the only way, like that's a legitimate doubt, all right? That's something that you should wrestle with, all right? Even though Jesus says, hey, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, nobody comes to the Father except through me, even though Jesus says that, you need to wrestle that to the ground right there. And if you say, well, I'm not sure about that, that's not a posture of doubt. That's actually faith in something else. That's a faith in the idea that there's multiple ways to get to your Heavenly Father. So see, when we question exclusive claims that Jesus makes, and I encourage you to do that, we just need to realize we're not coming from a neutral place. We're actually saying, no, I actually am coming from a different place of belief. And so Thomas in this story, I mean, he's coming from a place of belief. He's saying, hey, my experience. I mean, I'm just saying that, like, I've seen people die. I've seen people be crucified. I've watched Jesus be beaten within an inch of his life and then hang on that cross and die. All right, he's not doubting the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. All right, he just believes the opposite. He believes that, hey, nobody can beat death. That's what he's believing. For me, I've shared some over the last few months about some of my journey over the past year and a half that has led me through some pretty dry places spiritually, some pretty dark places with, dealing with some depression, some anxiety, and how at times through that, I mean, I just felt very distant from God. I felt very isolated in ways I just hadn't felt before. I hadn't dealt with depression before. And last weekend, I shared a bit of that, and out of the weekend, I got a number of texts and some emails from people, some of my friends, a few random people that just said, hey, I want to encourage you, I want to thank you for sharing that, I want you to know, when you say that, like, it validates that, like, if I'm in the same place, like, that God actually, like, sees me, and that I'm not abnormal, and it was just very encouraging. I just want to thank you. I mean, it's really cool when you get that kind of affirmation. But, I think for me, one of the tougher things that in the midst of that kind of dry journey, in lonely place I've been on at times, was simply to be comfortable with being there. To be comfortable with the reality that, hey, this is where it is, and I can't rush my way out of it. I mean, you can't just snap your fingers and get to a new place. I mean, you realize I've got to, continue working through the journey. I can't fake my way through the journey at times. I just have to be honest with where I am. Sometimes when I interact with friends, they'll be like, hey, Curt, how's it going? I'm like, well, today is a good day. And they're like, well, what does that mean? Was tomorrow not? I'm like, yeah, yesterday I hoped it would have been better, but it was. I just have to be honest with, how I really am. I have to be honest with God sometimes. I mean, every day I spend a little time with God, talking to him, I read, and there's days where I just don't feel it. There's days where I sit down and I just got to say, God, listen, I feel distant right now. I'm feeling like kind of in a lone place. And there's something about just being honest with where we're at. As we think about this whole idea of wrestling with doubts, I think there's kind of like 2 buckets we can consider ourselves in as we think about this. I know for some of us that are here today, some of us tuning in online, I mean, you're coming from a place where you just have really had no previous faith experience. And so all of this is new, and you're walking into Crosspoint or tuning into Crosspoint, and you're just like, man, I'm just trying to figure this out. I'm trying to understand who this person Jesus is. I've got a lot of questions. I'm trying to figure it out. I just want you to know, I think that's a really good place. That's a great place to be. I think there's another group of us that are in a different bucket where perhaps you've grown up in this. You've grown up in faith, but you've never questioned anything. And honestly, that's like a really difficult place to be. It's not very healthy to be in that place because, listen, you got to be honest about your doubts. You got to be real about, these are legitimate. And listen, God's not afraid of your doubts. And so you shouldn't be afraid of him either. So the first thing we've got to do, we've got to respect our opponent. We've got to respect the fact that we probably have some doubts. And then the second thing we have to do is we have to fight fair. See, wallowing is not fighting fair. Just sitting in it and be like, oh man, woe is me. That's not fighting fair. Stepping off the mat is not fighting fair. Wrestling with them, wrestling these things to the ground is how we fight fair. And of course, you say, well, how do we tell the difference on this? Well, there's kind of a buzzword that I think we can think about, this word that everybody kind of wants to consider themselves under. It's this idea of being open-minded. Everybody wants to be open-minded, right? Nobody wants to be closed-minded. And yet, let me just say that if you've ever had like a staunch objection to some kind of element of faith, and you've not been willing to like entertain and engage with disconfirming information, then that actually indicates you're a closed-minded person. Right? And so, open-minded people, they wrestle with their doubt. And it doesn't matter where you're starting, doesn't matter if you don't have much history, doesn't matter if you've been doing this your whole life. All right? When we wrestle with disconfirming information, it shows that we're open-minded and we're willing to wrestle and be in that place where we're open to new things. And I'm going to be honest, that's a healthy place for our growth. Now, I think another thing some of us kind of wander into at times is we use doubt as a mask. Right? And so sometimes our doubt, if we're really honest, it's not really a doubt issue. It's just like a I don't want to do it issue, right? It's like an obedience issue. In fact, the great American pioneer Mark Twain, he once put it this way. He said, it ain't the parts of the Bible that I can't understand that bother me. It's the parts that I do understand. He's like, it's the ones that I actually really get. He's like, I just don't want to do them. It's the parts where like Jesus says, hey, love your enemy. And you're like, oh man, did he really say that? I mean, do we think he really said that? No, he did say that. We just doubt it because we don't want to do it. Or it's the parts where he says, show kindness to those who hurt you. And we don't want to do it. And so I think we have to be honest about, is this a doubt issue or is this kind of a rebellion issue? And I just don't want to do it. We have to ask ourselves that. But we still can't get away from the fact that there's going to be times where we have legitimate doubts. I think this is why the way Jesus responds to Thomas in this story right here is so powerful. Because he engages the doubters. This is why people loved him. This is why people wanted to be around him. I mean, Thomas appears there with him, and he comes up to Thomas and says, Thomas, hey, friend. He says, here, look at my hands. He's like, look at the holes in my hands. I mean, if you need to put your fingers in there, go for it. If that will help you believe. He's like, if you need me to lift my cloak up, you need me to show you my side, you want to put your hand in the wound to my side. I mean, if that's what you need to do, go for it. And see, in this moment, we see the posture of how Jesus approaches those who have doubts, which is all of us. And we see that Jesus is way more interested in winning you than he is in winning an argument with you. He's way more interested in winning a relationship with you than he is in winning an argument with you. I mean, he doesn't say, hey, how dare you? He doesn't say to Thomas, dude, what's up with you? I mean, the other 11 just bought it. Why can't you? He doesn't say that at all. You know what he does? He actually leans in. Third rule of engagement is once we get some of that information, once we begin to make progress, we have to acknowledge the winner. We have to acknowledge and lean into what we're actually seeing. I love what Thomas does next. Thomas actually models this for us. It's a great model for us right here. Take a look at verse 28. It says, Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. I mean, basically, he's making a declaration of faith right here. There's actually two parts to this declaration. I mean, number one, he's saying, hey, anybody who can do that? I mean, anybody, I thought 100% of people stay dead, and you predicted it. So anybody who can predict their death and like resurrect back to life and, pull the whole thing off, like you must be some kind of deity. He said, you must be a God. You must be of some kind of heavenly, being. But he doesn't just stop right there. I mean, he goes a step further at a much more profound level. He says, not only are you a higher being or a higher God, he says, you're my Lord. He says, my God and my Lord, which really is him saying my leader. He's saying, you're my master. This is like a declaration of total surrender. I mean, this is him recognizing in this moment, oh my gosh, Jesus, I'm going to bend my life to you. I mean, anybody who can do that, you must be who you say you are. All right, I want to order my life around you because anybody that can do that, you must have the ability to actually make life better because you've been able to show us not only that you can predict that, but you can actually do it. And I want to follow you. I want to make you my leader. And he just acknowledges, hey, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to acknowledge once I've discovered this. And I think that's what Jesus wants to lead us all to. And see, here's what's kind of cool on this. Many of us, we're kind of at the beginning of this seeking process right now. And I know for some of us, we're not going to go all the way to what Thomas did right there. We're not going to be able to go right now to that place of just saying, all right, Jesus is God. I mean, that might be outside the realm of possibility for some of us right now. But that doesn't mean we still don't wrestle that to the ground. It might take you years even. For Thomas, I mean, it took him a couple years, at least 3 years to get to this point. But see, when he did get to that point, when he processed and saw and had discoveries, interacted with Jesus, all of a sudden, he acknowledges, says, okay, I'm going to lean in on this. I'm going to bend my life to this. And so let me just say, in the meantime, as you wrestle with your doubts, just understand, man, doubting is not sinning. Right? So many times, I have conversations with people, man, if I have doubts, isn't that wrong? Isn't that sinful? You're never going to find a verse that says doubting is sinning. All right, even this moment with Thomas and Jesus right here. All right, even when Jesus says to Thomas, hey, stop doubting and believe. All right, he's not saying to, hey, nobody doubt. Nobody should ever have any doubts. What he's saying is, Thomas, I'm right here. What else do I need to do for you? I want you to look at my hands, look at my side. What can I do? He's relationally inviting him to take a step and lean in. He's saying, what else do you need to see so that I can actually show you that I'm trustworthy? And in that moment, Thomas acknowledges it, and he leans in. And my prayer is you and I, we get to the same place on whatever some of those places of doubt are. So I want to give us a couple walkouts as we wrap up. I have two really hopes for us, two prayers. These are a part of our next steps this weekend. Two things that I hope you will do this week as we head into the week. Number one, I hope you will wrestle with the doubts that you have this week. All right, I hope you'll identify them. What is the major objection for me? In fact, I'm going to give you a moment to do that here in a second. Well, what is that roadblock for me right now? Maybe it wasn't a roadblock a month ago, but something happened. And man, it just caused me to have some questions about the trustworthiness of Jesus. All right, maybe it's about his character. Maybe it's about who he is. Maybe it's about God and his existence. I'm going to tell you something. There's a reward when we wrestle with these things. In fact, the writer of Proverbs, this great writer of wisdom, he actually gives us some insight on this. He says, that's right. If you will make insight your priority, chasing insight, and you won't take no for an answer, searching for it. Look at his imagery right here. He says, searching for it like a prospector panning for gold. Now, you've probably never panned for gold. I've never panned for gold. I've seen it in films. I've seen it in movies, and it's a tedious process, right? You don't just get a big pot of gold. It takes ongoing work to get a little bit of progress. But he says, like a prospector panning for gold, like an adventurer on a treasure hunt. See, you and I, we just want to be finders, right? We don't want to be adventurers and hunters. We want to be finders. He says, like a prospector panning for gold, like an adventurer on a treasure hunt. Believe me, and before you know it, fear God. The fear of God will be yours, meaning the awe of God, the awareness of God will be yours, and you will come upon the knowledge of God. What he's saying is, man, if you'll have a fierce urgency and coming after me, he's saying, man, I'm gonna reveal myself to you. Have you ever pursued anything with a fierce urgency? This past Tuesday, I did a wedding ceremony, a very intimate wedding ceremony for a longtime friend of mine. Just family, very intimate. And one of the things I do in any wedding ceremony that I perform, I ask the couple to write down and send to me why they've chosen each other. Like, why have you chose the groom? Of all the guys, like, why this one right here? And of all the women, why did you choose her? And so they send these to me, and then I build these into the wedding ceremony and just kind of remind the bride and groom when they're standing here, getting ready to commit their lives to one another, hey, here's why you're standing here today. Here's what drew you to one another. And I got to the end of what the groom had wrote, and he talked about, I chose you because of this, and I chose you because of that. And then at the very end, he had this line that, man, it just gripped me when I read it in the middle of the ceremony. He said this. He said, I will fiercely protect and preserve our marriage always. And I'm like, wow, man, I will fiercely protect. I will fiercely chase after preserving our marriage. Man, there's something powerful that happens when we pursue things with a fierce urgency. So I hope whatever that doubt is for you this week, man, you'll wrestle it to the ground. No, God wants you to do that. And then the second thing that I think happens that will come about when you do that is that your testing will give way to trusting. See, in the story of God, and we see this over and over through the Old Testament, we see this in the New Testament, that faith really is a relational term. I mean, so many times when it comes to what do I believe, what do I have faith in, we think of it as lists, like I do believe this, I don't believe that, I can prove this, I can't prove that. We think of it logistical, but that's maybe part of the equation. But there's a relational side to faith. In fact, whenever we look at God's story, faith, the word faith actually is this idea of banking your life on the faithfulness of someone else. Think about that for a moment. Banking your life on the faithfulness of someone else, including our interaction with God. Now, one of the best pictures I can think about when it comes to giving you an example of this is the picture of marriage. You know, when two individuals enter into a marriage relationship, I mean, they're not entering into a contract. I mean, they're entering into a covenant. It's not like, well, if you do this, then I'll do that. That's a contract. If you pay me this service, then I'll pay you this. You give me this good, I'll pay you this fee. I mean, it's no contract. It's not if you do this, I'll do that. It's a covenant. I mean, you've heard the words. It's like for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and good health, right? You've been there. You've heard the phrases that we use. And yet, let me tell you something. When I said I do to my wife nearly 27 years ago, later this month, listen, when we stood there at the altar, I didn't know where she would be 10 years from that day. I didn't know if she would be upholding her vows to me 10 years later, 20 years later. She didn't know if I'd be upholding those vows 20 years later. I mean, there was no way to have a 100% certainty in that moment. But see, what I did know is that I'd seen enough in our experience and our years together up to that point that I said, you know what, I've seen her faithfulness, and I'm willing to put the weight of my life in her, in this relationship. And she did the same. And see, that's what it means to come into a place of faith with Jesus as our Savior and our leader. It's a relational faith, even in the midst of the questions. I was talking to a couple recently that are going through a cancer journey, and they're kind of walking me through the journey that they went through and just some of the unique moments that they had no idea that God was in the midst of before they ever found the cancer. And they could look back, backwards. You can't usually see this in the moment, but they could look back and say, oh my gosh, God was preparing us right here before we ever found out this was going to be a part of our journey. And as I was sharing with them, it reminded me of my wife's cancer journey a few years ago, which was very much the same. I'll never forget how Julie and I, we had done some things and made some decisions that kind of opened us up to some realities that had we not done that, as Julie's oncologist said, we probably would have never found this cancer until it was far deeper and into further stages. And I just remember looking back, and in those moments when you see that, you begin to see, oh my gosh, God had his hand in this right here. That testing gives way to trusting. You're like, oh my gosh, God, you're trustworthy. And yet what I find myself doing is I face the next challenge and I get in that place where I go, oh my gosh, God, am I going to be able to trust you in this? I'm like, why do I forget so quickly? Why do I forget so quickly? And so even in the midst of your doubting, man, I want you to remember how Jesus and Thomas interacted right here. He reaches out and says, Thomas, touch my hands, touch my side. He says, I'm more interested in winning relationship with you than I am in winning an argument with you. So as we wrap up, I want to ask you to write a question down. And so I want you to go ahead and take out your device. If you tune in online, you can take out your device, a piece of paper, wherever you take notes. I want you to open up a notes app, or if you email yourself, I email myself, open up an email to yourself or text yourself. I'm going to give you a question in just a moment that I want you to respond to, and this is just for you. All right, no, you're not going to turn this in. This is just for you to work on this week. Now, before we do that, was anybody in here ever a wrestler? Anybody ever a wrestler in high school, college? Okay, not that kind of wrestling right there. I mean, like, not WWE. Anybody like a real, like, high school wrestler? All right, I know we got John in the band. I was never a wrestler. I had a lot of friends who wrestled, but I learned something about the matches as I went to watch. And one of the things I learned is that, when you are on the mat, there are certain rules of engagement. And one of the rules of engagement is once you engage with your opponent, you actually lose points if you step off the mat. In fact, in some cases, you might even be disqualified if you step off the mat. And I think that's what Jesus is asking of us. I think he's just saying, hey, would you be willing to stay on the mat with me? I mean, I think he's saying to us, hey, I'm not expecting you to have it all figured out. I'm not expecting you to have it all together. God just invites us to do the same thing that Jesus invited Thomas to do. He says, will you just stay on the mat with me? As you have doubts, as you have questions, as you experience things that maybe cause you to, question my trustworthiness, will you stay on the mat with me? Will you wrestle with me? And so what I want to ask you to do is, the band's going to play for us here a bit in a moment, just give us kind of a moment to sit under this question. I want you to write something down. I want you to write down one of your objections. I want you to write down perhaps one of your doubts. What's one of the things you're just struggling with right now? What's one of the things that is just a barrier for you right now between you and God, or you in trusting Jesus more and more? Just write that down. It's just for you. But I want you to write something down, and then we're gonna ask God to join us in that here in just a moment. All right, so here's what we're going to do this week. I want you to take that question. I want you to take that objection, and I just want to ask you, would you be willing to wrestle? Would you be willing to wrestle with this week? Would you be willing to stay on the mat with this week? I mean, that's all God's asking you. Will you wrestle with him? Will you seek him out? Will you maybe do some study, maybe get in the Bible app and seek out a study so you can better understand how to grow in this area, how to better increase your understanding? Let me tell you something. The prophet Jeremiah actually gives us a really cool insight to what happens when we do that. He says, man, when you come looking for me, he says, you're going to find me. He says, yes, when you get serious about finding me and you want to, look at this, more than anything else, I think that's that fierce urgency right there. When you get serious about finding me and you want it more than anything else, look at what he says. He says, I'll make sure you won't be disappointed. He says, I'm going to make sure you're not going to be disappointed. I'm going to make sure that you actually experience and see and get some resolution on this. And so this week, I just want to ask, will you join us in that? I mean, that's an amazing invitation right there. That's an invitation with a promise attached to it. Man, if you run after me, if you run after me and you want it more than anything else, I promise you won't be disappointed. Well, we're gonna close with a song, and the band's gonna lead us in this. And I love this line in this song because sometimes we're like, I don't even know what to pray. I don't even know what to ask. Well, we're gonna give you the words right here. In fact, we're going to ask you, you might even say these words with us. If you don't like singing out loud, you might, in this moment, when we get to this line right here, you might just want to say this out loud with us. It says, let faith rise up. Oh, heart, believe, let faith rise up in me. And I just want to invite you to make this your prayer this week. I mean, as we sing this, as you think about this barrier, this place of doubt, or this place where you're not 100% confident, whatever you wrote down, would you just wrestle that down? Would you stay on the mat with that? And then just pray, God, would you just let faith rise up in me? Let's do that together as we sing.
I don't want to be afraid every time I face the waves. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid. And I don't want to fear the storm just because I hear it roar. I don't want to fear the storm. I don't want to fear the storm. let faith rise up. Oh, heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Let faith rise up. Oh, heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Let faith rise up. Oh, heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Peace be still. Say the word and I will. Set my feet upon the sea till I'm resting in the deep. Peace be still. You are here, so it is well. And when my eyes can't see, I will trust the voice that speaks. Peace all
That's our prayer for you this week, that a faith and a confidence would rise up in you as you do the work of wrestling with your doubts and your objections this week, that your testing would lead to more and more trusting. And in the meantime, be encouraged. Jesus loves when we chase down our doubts and our questions. It's why people who were nothing like him actually liked him. Now, if you made the choice today to take advantage of the grace that Jesus brings to us by taking a step to trust him as your Savior and leader, we would love to celebrate that with you. So be sure to let us know on your connection card. And if you'd like someone to pray with you today, you can text the keyword "need prayer" to 317-834-7373, and a member of our prayer team will be in touch with you. For those of you who are givers, I just want to take a minute to say thank you for all that you make possible with your generosity through the Joy Box. And if you want to become a giver, you can go to the Give button at the top of the screen or to crosspointweb.org/give, and know that when you do that, you are empowering this message and so much crazy goodness and hope that comes out of this place. So thank you. All right, thanks so much for joining us today. We cannot wait to see you next time.